Mhm. Oh, what are you doing here? What are you doing vertical? What are you doing out of bed? What are you doing muted? Yeah, you're still muted.
Sorry, I did say I'd be here today, so here I am.
Yeah, but you're even up and about.
So, well, the difficulties at the moment, it's every time I stand up or bend over, it's just a roll of the dice as to whether it sets off another couple of hours of complete and sheer agony. It's sort of, so I'm just taking things easy at the moment.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Good idea. So I just put in the link, thefutureoftext.org. I have put WordPress on there. It was Adobe Muse or something, which is of course no longer supported. So should be a bit better now.
This is a 2022 symposium thing, right? Yeah. We're fixed on September, are we?
Yeah, 27th and 20th.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll put that in my diary now while I remember.
There is actually on the page for the day an iCal link. You can click on it. Goes
oh, cool. Okay, I will do that very thing. That will save me a bunch of faffing about, won't it?
But we don't have a venue yet, so that's a bit annoying. I'm working on it.
Well, you know, when and where iCal, there we go. Allow, yes. Yeah. There we go. Should just put that in as calendar. Oh, okay, that's interesting. So that's interesting. Okay, well, that's fine. So what was the deal? So the guy on Friday was doing what?
Oh, have you not had a chance to see it yet?
No, I haven't. No.
He did really good actual stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And hang on. I'm just changing one sentence on our side.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, can you please reload the page that is the symposium, the one futuretext.org/.
Yep. Yeah.
Try to make it a little bit more clear that knowledge work in VR is the link to the event. Is that clear enough, or should I bold it?
Let's just go raise awareness potential of work in VR. So where would I spot the thing about knowledge work? Let me just shift refresh.
Hang on, refresh one more time, please. I had to change something.
Yeah. Raise awareness of potential work in VR.
No, on the page /symposium. Oh, sorry. Yeah, of course, you're looking at the right thing.
I'm looking at Future Text Publishing 2022-07-09-2022 page.
No, look at the one that's just called /symposium.
On the main, okay, slash. Okay, right. Yeah, it says symposium, upcoming 2022 knowledge work in VR, London, UK. That one.
Hang on, but you need to reload, please.
So, right.
The cache.
No, I've only just loaded this page. So I'm looking at futuretextpublishing.com/symposium.
No. How did you get to that page?
Well, you told me /symposium, so I took out what I had before and put symposium after the domain name.
The futureoftext.org/symposium.
Futureoftextpublishing.com I've got.
No.
Sorry, that was the domain I was on, and the link you put in earlier. Okay, future.
No. The link I put in is just the futureoftext.org.
No, sorry. A link I just clicked took me to futureoftextpublishing.com. That was the link you put in yesterday.
Oh yeah, so okay. No, that's fair enough. That's fair enough.
It's all right. So anyway, I'm at futuretextpublishing.org/symposium, and I've got a small page saying symposium. This symposium cover all that sort of text with an emphasis on interactive text. This will result in 2 volumes, upcoming 2022. So I presume I go to that one, which takes me to the future of text. So I'm now on a white page at futureoftext.org. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then I need to go to the symposium, presumably.
Yeah.
Okay. The annual is supported by. So I still haven't found anything to do with the knowledge work yet. So I'm sort of skim reading it. So okay, knowledge work in VR, but I'm not. Gosh, where is one supposed to start? I'm actually very lost in a sense of where are you expecting people to start?
The futureoftext.org.
Okay, let's go back to that. Let's go back to the futuretext.org. Come on. Right. So, and they might know, right, they're going to, so.
Hello, guys.
Symposium.
So what Mark is struggling through to check for me is, if you also could please have a look, the futureoftext.org. Just, if you can just have a look and click through to the symposium, first of all, to see if you can find it. And if there's anything funny, that would be greatly appreciated. Okay,
the only thing that sort of is okay, so I now have to, so if I go from the main text, go to the symposium page, and the link, the thing that I'm looking for at this point about the symposium is actually the second link down that says knowledge work in VR. There's a whole lot of stuff that actually isn't pertinent to what I'm looking for, that is all about the symposium generally. But what I'm getting at is so the page we're actually trying to get to is that you want people to get at is at 2022/07/11/2022-symposium.
Well,
that's the thing that's actually about the thing. All the rest is navigation on Route 2.
Not really. I think that the symposium page has value too, because it has the record of the last 11 symposia.
So
So-
no, I'm not saying it isn't. What I'm trying to. We're talking about cross purposes here. I'm talking about. I'm someone who's been told about this. I'm just trying to find out with a minimum number of clicks and side quests to get to 2022/7/11/2022 symposium. So it's about 3 links in from the root domain.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to.
I'm wondering why you need to take people by the symposium listing page.
Okay, I'm trying to explain that. Okay, so that's what we need to go through. The thing
Okay.
is, we've had several sites, and I think we need something quite clean that
Mhm.
we don't go on and on forever, but people are happy with. So what I've done is on Future Text Publishing, that is now only the books and the journal with a reference to the symposium.
Yeah.
The futureoftext.org highlights symposium and publishing. It also references separately the lab software and metadata.
Okay.
So
I understand. What I'm trying to relate back is this is the crosscut between the author's desire of what they want people to read and what the reader will actually read without giving up.
Mark, which reader are you referring to?
I'm referring to somebody who's been said, oh, find out about this symposium, and I'm just saying, I had to click. Let me finish. I had to click more links than it seemed practical to get to the page that actually
you started on the wrong domain, Mark. Of course you had to click extra. On this one, it's 2 clicks. And there is a reason for it. I'm trying to explain that we're not just targeting one user. There are several things here. And if you click on symposium, and then you say the symposium produced books, and then there's a link to the page. But below you can see that there are others. So what I'm asking everybody is that onerous or is that useful?
Yes, it's onerous. I'm with Mark. I think that it should be the most recent first, and then a link to past symposia. So that the first link to symposium. So I do think that Future of Text should. It's okay for the Future of Text to go symposium publishing. My conjecture would be the same as Mark's, that first symposium link should deal first and foremost with the most up-to-date information about a symposium, and then if necessary go to the past symposia kind of information. That would be my preference, and that's the way that, for example, ACM Wist goes. If you go to acm.wist.org, then it redirects you, in fact, directly to the 2022 page, and make sure that there's a handy reference to all of the past symposia.
Peter?
Yeah, I concur with Mark. People are incredibly lazy, and even one click is enough for them to just click away and never come back. What I'd do is I'd have you land on the page for this year's symposium with the sidebar having past symposia in reverse chronological order. So the head of the list would be last year's, working down to the original.
Yeah, there's no sin here, Fred. It's just that I think as I think we're probably training, it's just human laziness is what we're fighting. And yep. I try and keep in 2 separate parts as what I do, because I know I want to get there, and what I'm thinking the average person, I don't see what I want, I'll go and do something else.
We're not average.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but the thing is, there's 365 days a year. The symposium is there for 2 days, 1 or 2 days. So I think very much the other parts of the year, people will want to look at the records.
And at Apple, we change it.
Yep.
At Apple, we change it.
The day after the symposia, flip it to historical view.
But it's also there's also a nice thing to have, links that don't change. I mean, I guess we could change it that the page goes to that, and all right, okay, I'll try something.
It's really it's difficult. It's difficult because you're absolutely right. There's nothing wrong with what you're saying. The problem we're fighting is general human laziness, and so it becomes a binary thing of, well, what's going to get people to actually to the right page. And although there may be things we might want to read en route, but the reality is what we want and what they'll do are rarely coinciding unless you have a very tight interest group.
Right.
But it's especially interesting as a tension and a question in the context of a symposium that is about hypertext. So the irony is not lost.
I just dropped in a link to IBM's Programming Languages Day series, so you can have a look at how they did it.
Okay.
I like the little sidebar box with the important dates, and it's a very good call out. And people will be looking for submission and registration information the minute they hit the page.
Mm. It's this classic problem with where the reader and the author broadly want the same things, but arguing in a different order. there's normally no one size that suits all. No, one design rather.
Okay, you can reload the front page.
Cool. And I would be perfectly happy with a. Oh, you got the symposium up there in the menu.
That's good.
I would also be perfectly happy with a link to past symposia actually in the body of the information
Yeah, it's
down
there. It's
below
at
as
the
well.
bottom.
Cool. That works.
Good. Oh, one other minor stylistic quibble on my screen with the 2021 supposedly breaking over 2 lines, as opposed to having the date as a continuous one. So if you could maybe adjust the CSS so that middle column could be a hair wider so that the year doesn't get broken.
On which?
The 2000 recordings of prior symposia on my screen, at least,
Yeah,
it has
here too.
20, then 20, and then on the next line, 21. And that should be non-breaking for the year.
Yeah,
I
but
presume the width is optimized for a phone because it's actually even on a 14-inch screen. It's actually very narrow, the text column.
Yep.
So you could probably get a bit more above the fold by having a slightly
if
wider.
someone wants to
body
have fun, if someone wants to have fun with the WordPress CSS, you're very welcome to it.
Okay.
I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't understand why WYSIWYG web died, but it did. So that's
We should all be using LaTeX for everything.
LaTeX results in more errors for people. They produce worse stuff than if they were using simpler schema. LaTeX has the ability to produce very excellent things. Most people do not produce them with it.
Yeah. I think the trouble is also some people very active in LaTeX are firmly focused on print as the world sails off in a different direction. So it does produce very nice print. That's not arguably what we want most of the time.
Oh, speaking of print, I just started Stephen Fisher. Stephen Roger Fisher, a history of writing. I'm very much looking forward to it. I finished Metazoa, and that was a thrill. And as with everything, redoubled my enthusiasm for creating senses and the ability to and essentially new motor skills or meta motor skills in the sense that Godfrey Smith. Have you read it as well, Mark, or Peter?
Which one?
Metazoa.
Yes, I have.
it's solid. It's really neat. And what as with most people who are actually connected with animal life, believe that cognition is related to action and sensing. And so what it doesn't immediately follow for most other people is that means to change cognition, you change action and sensing. And in doing so, you will change cognition. But yeah, that's my conclusion every single time I come across that kind of thinking. And I feel like computing and not least information processing in virtual reality is the easiest path to that.
I recall Paul Smart, who I don't think most of you have met, who's sort of a colleague of a friend of mine, and he was talking about, it was sort of theory of consciousness or theory of mind or something. One of the things he was saying, well, one line of thinking at the moment is that, in fact, how you undertake, if you desire to pick up glass, what your body's actually doing is it posits the hold in the glass position and then measures the delta from where it expects to be, which sort of turns things around slightly. I don't know how true that is, or that's something else, but it was another thing that's rattling around the back of my brain when reading some of this.
Yes, well, I think the positing and the anticipation of the specific stimulus part I would agree with, but I would err on the side of Gigerenser's view of the way that we catch a ball, and sort of expect it to be more like that, where we launch our hand at a certain velocity and watch the rate that it closes at to be able to do that. And, you contrast how you pick up a glass when you look at it with your eyes open versus how you pick it up once you look at it, close your eyes, and then move it. And yeah, I think that there are, like, although it may be simply that your colleague Smart is doing more work than I would with the word calculation. And if anticipation is what he means, then I would tend to agree. But yeah,
I think
we're not doing differential equations, is what I mean.
Yeah, I think part of the derivation was it came out trying to work out, in sense that the calculation needed versus the activity that we see going on, when we try and measure it neurologically, would imply that.
Yeah.
So in other words, there isn't a person sitting at a sort of keyboard up here making it all happen. There has to be. And so it's basically how the body manages the inputs, because if everything was inputting all the time, there'd be overload. So it's a thing of sort of how we focus our attention, even subconsciously, on the important things at the time. Like, we need to know where our fingers are more than our toes.
Yeah, and we for a start, we have more, at least going to the somatosensory cortex, relating to the direct sensory position. But it's very likely to that point, like because where your hand is isn't really informed by that. That's actually to do with proprioception and the capacity to assess things like the Golgi tendon receptors inside your muscle fibers. And so to that end, those are probably unbalanced as well. Those are probably just tilted toward hands as the rest of our sort of platform is. But yeah, so I'm very, very excited. My wife also uncovered. We have a draft document of, if we were to write a book about all of this, what it would cover, and it was really pleasing to kind of go back over that. Although in my new role, what I'm supposed to be doing for Apple is that much closer to this stuff that perhaps it's plausible that they would own it if I would pursue it. So that's bittersweet. Means that I'm doing what I want, but it also means that I'm doing what I want for the man.
Because I just put well, this will be a UK link, but that's sounding quite interesting. It's of taking an alternate view on where are we? We don't need all that marketing guff. This is a book that actually just came out quite recently on animal senses that I thought will be interesting in part because it's a bit like I've just been reading The Secret Life of Trees, and that's quite interesting too. Because it's like talking about the fact that trees have had to march north and south to avoid ice ages. Just you don't really think of trees as moving because, well, they move one generation at a time, but they have actually moved south and north again over the centuries in response to climate. So they think about things. Well, think.
Yes, and they respond over commune as well. There are practical consequences to the stimulus in one part, certainly in one part of a tree, but also in some collections through the mycelium networks and things like that as well. Yeah, no, it's the impact of sensation and the way that we can sort of simplify the path of seeing certain features of information or groups of information or characteristics of thereof. I think, yeah, it's going to be really fun to actually have that brief, and also a little scary, frankly, because I'll have to put my my ability where my mouth is in terms of what are worthwhile kind of avenues to pursue with it.
But it's interesting too, if you think in terms of these sort of other, you can read, say, a book about, animals, other forms of senses as just always in the world wonderful and different. But there's also an element of saying, okay, so what of this might we adopt, albeit not in the way it's affected biologically in that organism, but seeing this particular thing. And it's also interesting thinking about it in terms of sort of a VR type environment, and then this whole thing of embodiment. So might I be able to provide a feedback for a sense I don't currently have, but which I want to have, and how would I embody that within the environment?
Yeah, I think I lean on most people's neuroplasticity in that regard, the sense that it, for the most part, that doesn't actually really matter the specific manifestation of these things, and it's more a matter of consistent mappings to things that we have the ability to make a direct percept of at such time as it's valid. So you can probably put anything you want on your tongue, and it's sensitive enough that, pending the appropriateness of that sensation at the time, that you should be able to get a lot of information from it. So it's a matter of sort of expecting to drive that coupling more directly than staring at an Excel spreadsheet. It's what are the insights that we wish more people to have? What is a stimulus that we believe most people will be more sensitive to than the one that currently gives rise to the sort of nominal experts having that insight about that thing? And then is that too weird, or how do we bring those two things closer together such that more people can notice that thing about those things? And yeah, in the context of what that means for web, I think, yeah, it'll be about the sort of the characteristics of websites, and as well as maybe what people can do, because they'll think history and navigation and what kind of level of detailed views of the sort of context that you occupy are, will be an interesting thing to pursue, because as you were talking about with breaking spaces on phones, one thing that's kind of unavoidable with these things is that they're phenomenally limited and possess a very, very hard limit for where the screen is. And we've sort of attempted to fill that maximally with the content that we deem to be necessary. But because of the poverty of space, we've had to make some pretty hard decisions. And things like the sidebar that Peter was talking about providing so much benefit. IBM website are some of the first things to go out the window in terms of landmarks that we have persistent availability. We have hamburger menus and whatever else to be able to kind of backfill that and add slightly more capacity. But if you have a lot, if nothing else, a lot more space that you can devote to understanding what a website is, what do you do with it? So yeah,
It's
that's not this
interesting.
week, but next week. It's going to be fun.
It's interesting you say that, because in a sense, this idea of saying having hamburger menus and things.
Guys, is
yep.
there any interest in the group to discuss the symposium or the content of the website or the messaging or who we should invite?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay, yeah, I mean, if you could have a look at the site, that would be useful. But yeah, we don't have to do that. No, it's up to what you want to do. I'm finding
No, that seems relevant. I'm happy to I'm happy to switch gears.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I just thought you were editing, Parade. we were just filling.
Yeah, no, it's just a bit frustrating because we have this loose group of people, and oh, good timing. Hi, Alan. I was just about to say, it's quite frustrating. We're having such a loose group of people when we try to do a specific thing, because you know, when we don't actually work together, it's nice to have the chats, but every time there's any kind of a project, it becomes really, really difficult. And I don't mind admitting that. You know, we all have issues. I mean, this week, I send out to the supposedly editor core group. I get a message back from Bintsurf saying, oh, we should have these people dealing with accessibility in VR. Why? It's an interesting issue, but it's not the future of text and it's not working. And then Klaus comes back, who's now on board, but hardly ever has time, saying, this is a great idea. Look at these other people. And then Dini is getting some artists, which is clearly relevant. But in terms of just building the websites, you know, getting a messaging that we agree with rather than, you know, people just saying this is wrong, that is wrong, is really, really kind of difficult, which I'm sure you all understand. So,
Yes.
yeah. So yeah,
My wife is an edit. My wife is an editor, and it was hard enough sort of drafting my goodbye to everybody email for my work. So I absolutely sympathize. I would say though I'm actually completely on board with him. Accessibility is an essential aspect of virtual reality in text, and you know, Safari obviously has enormous chops in the accessibility space, and in terms of the recommendations that it makes for how to make sure that text is accessible. Something that's front and center of my concern for shall we say the next generation of information as presented by computers is a concern that the opinionation that accompanies the current state of presentation is inappropriate for the context that we will perceive it in right now. And so that's why I'm like, you know, people believe that they can control every iota of presentation within a web page. And I think that's counter to certainly the initial sort of concept of how a web, because, you know, a GeoCities page from the early 90s would have been just as responsive as the most quadruple A sort of system that we have today. You wouldn't have to, you know, munch any of the tab orders or put in alt text and things like that, because it was all text, and for the most part, people didn't have the ability to configure or move that around. I mean, you know, fell away immediately once we had the ability to misuse tables for visual layout. But the point stands, like a plain page is a responsive page. But yeah, in that context, given that there's going to be a broader variety of mechanisms through which a page can be consumed, that accessibility and the considerations that need to go into that will continue to be relevant and increase in relevance because different people will have to be able to consume it in different ways.
Yeah, no, I get that. That's not a problem. But my frustration, particularly today, is, I went through by the way, Alan, thefutureoftext.org is the top level page for this. And going through it earlier today, because the sites are a bit of a mess, so I just wrote the symposium publications. Below that, I put the other stuff, the lab, the software, and the metadata stuff. And I guess on one level, it should have made me happy. Oh, look at these things, what I have done, right? But it did the exact opposite, because the software, I mean, it's actually doing quite well in the App Store, but I make between 500 and 1,000 a month. That's it. None of the other efforts make any money. And the reason I'm saying it is not poor me, not at all. The reason I'm saying it is sometimes, I don't know if you feel, but I feel that sometimes we measure our worth by what we generate in terms of usefulness. So, it's just not very useful. And then there are two pieces of kind of prose on the website. One is why text, and the other one is why VR, where I do the whole hyperbole stuff. But having gone through 11 years of the future of text, of trying to focus and saying, guys, text is important, text is valuable. And I know I'm preaching to the choir with you guys, so please understand that. I'm so grateful that you are here. This is not admonishing you, it's rather the opposite. And then now we're going a level deeper. I was basically saying text and VR, right? So it's like a niche of a niche. And yeah, I know there are very, very, very many really important aspects of VR. But, and I'm sure Klaus will watch this, and with all the due respect in the world, like when you look at audio in VR, yes, that's important too. And that's what he was suggesting, but that ain't text, and that ain't really related to knowledge work. So it just becomes really, really hard to try to focus and do something useful. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I understand that it's really
I
hard, but go ahead, Randall.
I was just going to dispute unhelpfully. I think I feel like sound should be part of text in computing in general, and not least in VR. But I agree that it's most relevant given the through line of what future of text has been to focus on textual components and knowledge work. And so I feel like you're totally in the right to say those are valid concerns. The most important thing for future of text to pursue in VR is text in VR, and that may include those, but it's, yeah.
If somebody wants to do text with sound, fantastic. But what I've been battling over a decade is text. Yeah, but what about? What about the images? What about the this and stuff? Crying out loud. If it is together with powering each other, fantastic. Anyway, Alan, what were you saying?
Oh, just some side thoughts on that. Of course, I haven't been around much, and I can't stay the whole time. Still want to have more time to do this in some capacity, which will have to be another job. But to address what you were saying specifically, yeah, I imagine it must be very stressful to try to build something on one end and put in the maker mind, and then on the other, realize that you're a community organizer and that you have to mitigate the various concerns. On those two specific ones, from a maker mind, yes, that would be annoying. From the actual, what do we want the future to be like? I'll address both of them. First off, accessibility is something that not only can be addressed, but also embraced. I was just talking the other day about how extraordinary it is that Zoom and remote work has, it's volatile right now, but it's way more of the norm than it was 2 years ago, and how that levels the playing field so tremendously, not only to locations, but to people with complications, accessibility is appropriately framed as trying to keep in mind all variety, all edge cases of human interaction, right? It can also be framed in a greedy way, in a self-promoting way, that the track record of accessibility has actually benefited the general population. It's the inventions that come out of the need for speech to text in the iPhone, with which we had accessibility in mind, that is now becoming a standard way to communicate, where I even write a lot of times by just having it transcribe my words into text. So that leads to the second point. I always view text maybe with a little, it is without a doubt complex and cross-functional, arguably multimodal, like there's not a point where something from the book Language and Reality, there's not a point where those words are something different because they are spoken versus text. Things happen, they are not exactly the same thing, but words and language are bound into the idea of text in an inseparable way, I would argue. And so even though VR is the focus at the moment right now, right? What is underneath VR, I would argue that is right in line with the vision of future of text, is that what is the multimodal experience of text? What are the opportunities out there? Personally, I want speech to graph, not just speech to text. So yeah, those are my two sub points on those particular topics, and then empathy towards you for understanding how difficult it's got to be to try and manage all this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, what you said there is fine for a presentation, but it's just we have it is quite a lot of time that you guys are investing when you are here. Alan, I know you have a job, so that was not a dig at you, so that's very much appreciated. But it's also, what are we really making here? We have the monthly calls, which are transcribed and recorded, and that's a good and useful outcome. But it is, I don't know what model might be used. For instance, for this one, we could very easily accommodate different VR experiences, but we haven't been actually very good at actually making some of them. There are some from, that we were planning to show Vint whenever he has time, and Elio, now that I can say his name, has some great stuff that could be shown in that context. But anyway, yeah, Mark.
Yeah, I echo the sort of empathy coming back to you. I mean, I think it's true, doing anything for the wider community. The dictum that no good deed goes unpunished is very true. And sometimes, one has to push through. But when you're talking about things of the future of text, and everyone's saying, yes, what about the, the pictures of this, that, the other, it strikes me that maybe, we need to turn the thing inside out. So a lot of the time people are describing text as, yes, what I do, or what I, my point of focus interacts with the future of text because it involves text, which inadvertently defines text in the framing of that thing. So I'm an illustrator, or I'm an author or something. Who speaks for the text might be to look at it the other way, in the sense that, yes, you can use text for this purpose, you can use text for this, it's there. And I think the latter question is really relevant, because the game, so riffing off the point that Alan just made about, well, okay, so what is the textual experience in this more fluid virtual environment? We need a way to sort of actually decouple the text from its quite tight coupling to its current usage. And one of the problems is that the legacy of print, paper print, hangs heavily over us, and sometimes we struggle to escape that. And it's not there's anything wrong with it, because heck, all of us here are reading lots of books and things. That's not the issue. It's the way in which it sometimes unhelpfully frames our ideas or constrains our ideas, because we keep we inadvertently reach for the easy prop of a print-based context for describing something. And so one of the things that I think we are pushing forward, if only slowly, is to move away from that.
Agreed.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Yeah, I know you're deeply concerned about what the Apples and the Googles were. I don't know if you're concerned about Google, but the Microsofts and whatever else being able to kind of capture exactly what it is that sort of the future of these interfaces are. But the reality is that virtual reality, and I imagine Linear, it's very exciting that it'll be on board for the symposium, will be one of the first to tell you that it was lousy and has been lousy for decades, and that this is more or less the first time that it's been good enough to even countenance considering text in the context of it, because the display resolution, the refresh rates, they weren't appropriate to the task of reading, which is such a detail and stability oriented kind of sensory operation. And so to the extent that it was possible to do all of the things that gave rise to the homuncular flexibility paper that Andrea linked, or the stuff that Jeremy Berlinson talks about being worried about rainforest destruction. It has maybe been plausibly capable of that, but it has actually not been capable of being able to deliver on any of the considerations that surround text. And so it's simply been off the table for everybody until now. And so because it wasn't worth thinking about in that regard, it probably has led people to erroneously conclude that it's not worth thinking about under any circumstances. And they're wrong and you're right, and you're just going to have to live with that. And while people kind of recognize and realize it, like I said, like being interested and overtly enough to organize a symposium around it in text is fringy enough as it is, but unfortunately it's just so much further out to be interested in text and VR, and there's very little anybody can do other than sort of sit with the technology a bit, try to do this work. Like I was saying with Elio, like it would be wonderful for somebody, just as useful for somebody to be actually sitting with those pieces of experimentation and exploration. And if you want to put more to your name with it, then maybe using some stuff would be interesting. But yeah, like there's not a lot for us to do yet other than continue planning and expecting, and you shouldn't be worried about a lack of output.
I think there's a ton of us to do. Can you guys go to the page I just put a link to, please? Because if you look at the goal of the, or rather goals, it should be, if you can first tell me if you agree with them, if I should edit them. And then secondly, if we agree with these goals, we need to orient ourselves around them. Because there are real known issues of VR work already, infrastructures, ownership, all of that stuff. So, and we really need to get this, we need to get it out there. And what Klaus recommended and what we're going to do is try to talk to some specific authors to cover specific areas rather than let everybody just write what they want.
You're talking about the link to the futureoftext.org, right? It's 4 paragraphs.
2022 slash that one, the one about the specific 2022 symposium.
I put in the sidebar. In the
Yeah.
chat.
Yeah.
I would say, as part of the general rebuttal to, who's the name of the name of Klaus's sort of view of what might be plausible goals to sort of bolt on, and I would say that this group and this symposium's area of focus is not VR. It's not even work in VR. It's text in VR and the work that flows from that, and being able to maintain that as the sort of the order of focus would for me mean that raise the awareness of potential work of the potential of work in VR. That may be true, but you know, if nothing else, that would cause me to bold the work rather than the potential, and probably to try to apply some clarifying adjectives or something to what kind of work, because people can do work in VR. They can do architecture, they can do telesurgery, you know, all the other things that have that much more low-hanging fruit, and so I'm not. So that said, I'm not aware of where that work is being done. Probably in VRST and IEEE VR have aspects of it, but what I'm less certain of is the interconnect between text and hypertextual considerations and virtual reality, whether those come through. I haven't looked through what was in VRST is later in the year, but yeah, like this is text in VR, and being unabashed about that, I think is good and important.
Couple of quick thoughts. Go ahead.
Sure, but, yeah, please go ahead, Alan, but please reload the page as well. I edited based on what Brandel said.
So personally, I look at VR as like a coordination point. And I think of our conversations as something of a parallax that, you know, by identifying a couple of coordination points, we can get a guess as to how far we are from things, right? So it's not that I'm not as interested in cracking the nut of text inside of VR, right? Because I'm not fully convinced that that's the appropriately stated problem, right? That is an attribute, that is part of the behavior, right? It gets wrapped up in there. But I definitely agree with VR as a coordination point, as a parallax point. So what does that mean? And then how that applies to maybe the symposium would be, what can we not take for granted for a moment? One example of that is we're talking about how to do work inside of VR. We're not talking about how VR changes work. That the actual Salesforce forms and fields and everything that we've been doing for the last 30 years, what degree does that change now that we're working in VR? Or is VR just the place where we can do the same kind of work that we've been doing? Obviously not. Obviously, work has been completely redefined by personal computing, not to mention the internet before it and everything like that, right? So it's fair to say that it will change the face of work. In order to do that, I would encourage that maybe we try to break down. It's funny, whenever I talk, Brendel goes out of the room.
That's on purpose, I'm sure.
He's learned. Yeah. I would.
There he is. He heard
I
you.
would look at breaking down the elements of VR without necessarily calling it VR, right? Like, for instance, in the form of text. Hey, Brett, I was just kidding with you. You keep doing what.
And I can hear I'm making a sandwich.
Okay. So one of the attributes, one of the wins you would get out of this idyllic VR scenario is immediate feedback, right? Like, I feel like I can, with my hands or something like that, move this information around. Okay, so that's one.
Alan, what you're saying now is really useful, but can you write it down?
I can, yeah.
Because this is part of the problem. We have these conversations and a lot of it is fluff. Like today, it was me being really frustrated. Who the hell wants to watch that in the future, right? But what you're talking about now is actually useful. And what I think we really need on this page about the day is to write that down. Even if you write it in a message here and I paste it in, right? Because one of the things you talked about, what are the things we cannot take for granted? That is in between issues and problems and opportunities, right? That is very worthwhile perspective. So why don't we maybe go together and write that, shall we?
Okay, well, to complete the thoughts, then I am recording this, so it is being transcribed into text, and I will be able to send it to you. The point of it is a conversation I'd like to have is, how can we work on how we talk about this stuff, right? Because right now, I think, perpetuate the frustration and the paradigms by just calling it text or VR or audio. If we tried to shift our focus to being like, what are the affordances that would be really valuable? And they may be gained in a spatial environment. It may be that it actually requires something more of a multimedia or always on computing in order to get there, right? But yeah, I think that is fluff in some ways, right? But there's a degree where those kinds of, that elevated conversation, that maturity in how we talk about it's going to be necessary before we can, I think, really make progress as a society in this much more invested kind of technology than other passive forms of tech.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Please have a look at the site and let's just figure out what to write in the goal list. Because as we talk to everyone else in this community, we've got to be able to point to a page and say, this is what we mean, and not spend hours per person kind of thing, right?
Well, if I understood Alan right, something I just put in the chat, I tried to do this thing of actually put it just into form of words, and I'm not sure if I articulated particularly well, but it strikes me that part of what I think is implicit in the point you raised is that, well, to what extent are we using what we call text? Because it's how we're used to encapsulating ideas. In other words, do we need to use text for everything we use it for at the moment in the way we think of text? Or is that even necessary for some things once we have something like VR? I suspect the answer is no, we won't need it for all things, because we'll have all sorts of ambient methods of capturing stuff that hitherto we'd captured textually.
That's a good point of discussion, but in terms of goals, maybe the goal based on that would be something like, where does text fit? Or how will text be different? Right, hang on, before you speak, Peter, let me just write that down. Hang on. Okay, you can reload if you want. Okay, Peter.
Okay, I really like the emphasis on usages of VR for work applications. Everyone latches on to gaming and just plain socializing in online communities, but that work aspect, I think, really distinguishes us from other groups. As far as the emphasis on keeping text around, one thought that brought to mind was, I had an old friend, I unfortunately lost track of him. He was in poor health, but he was a blind programmer, and he was getting incredibly frustrated with all the moves to graphical programming environments. For instance, in Blender, everything is building wireframe diagrams by dragging links across tiles, which is all well and good, but if you have those kinds
Sorry.
If you have those kinds of graphical systems, I think it's really critical that there be a bidirectional mapping to a purely textual representation. So for whatever we're doing in 3D, there should be a textualized version of that 3D environment or element that we're working with. And that provides the ongoing accessibility, sort of the Unix philosophy of have as a common denominator the text file that can survive across devices, can travel through any communication media. And really, it's incredibly compact and space efficient.
So something interesting that springs to mind when you say that is that when you say it should be a sort of a textual equivalent, is to take the stage further and say, but have a textual equivalent that doesn't that works back from where we were. So in other words, instead of assuming that we're starting in the old method of text, you say, okay, so we're using to that Blender or something. How do we actually encapsulate it? In other words, we don't start in the past, we start where we are and we extract what we need to be usefully textual. Because I think that's another thing we overlook. In a sense, this is all part of this thing of bringing forward things that are just familiar on the assumption that they are naturally optimized and the best they can be, which of course can't be the case if we're dealing with this new environment that we don't even fully understand yet. I mean, it doesn't stack up that, you know, the way we used to do sort of text in the round is as good as it can be.
So two things. First of all, I wrote something private to you in the chat. And secondly, I think it would be great if this conversation now is purely based on what to write under goals. Because everything you're saying is great, but how do we paraphrase it in a way that fits for that are worthwhile questions, right? You can reload. I've added quite a lot based on what has been said.
Okay, reloading. Oh, one other thought that Mark's last comment brought to mind was that having that textual equivalence also opens the door for automation possibilities. It's very hard to script and drag from coordinates 22, 157 to 695, 782. If you have a textual reference that can represent on-screen locations and then in a text mode indicate the operation that's happening. And that also suggests a visual parsing component so that if you are using a graphical interface and you're dragging a pipe from one output port on a tile to an input port on another tile in order to create some large rendering context or whatever, that also be representable as text so that the system could be automated. And then you can abstract out from that if you had a bunch of similar things and automate that, maybe create a single button that could replace having to do that. You can't automate things if you're just doing low-level direct manipulation. So text is our leverage point to get one step up in abstraction so we can start doing higher level manipulations and building higher order functions.
Yeah, well, I think, sorry, you have a hand, Mark.
No, go ahead, because I was going to let someone else go ahead first.
I think a critical component of what you're sort of discussing there, Peter, is the concept of attention and presence in the context of our interaction with a document or a set of features that are digitally encoded. And right now we have a text cursor, and we use that to move stuff. And we use that to indicate our presence in it. And in fact, you know, many analytics companies leverage the fact that people really do use the text cursor as a model for their attention and reading, so that they click and drag text to select it to indicate to themselves that they're reading, which, you know, paints a pretty interesting picture of what it is that we need to do in order to be attentive and attend to things. And yeah, like there's you put that there, which is a really interesting sort of model of how we might approach this in a more immersive environment. And then there's things like grid overlays. I think you'll find actually that iOS already has a number of pretty interesting and arguably heavy-handed approaches to being able to access and locate specific objects in specific regions. And they're just suspiciously good for the scope that they exist within iOS. No comment. So yeah, like I think that there's a lot of really interesting things about how we attend to and regard and address places that will be important. So I agree.
Let's do the bullet list. Because this group is very chatty, which is the whole point. But let's try to see if we can narrow it down to points. And please reload again. Anything to add or edit?
Well, the reason, the thing I was going to mention was something that I'm not sure is in there at the moment, whether or not we then take it out again, is something that was alluded to when I was speaking earlier in the sort of bridge from the text to the graph, which is interesting because that gets us into the hypertextual nature of things. And now with VR, we have an environment where we potentially can, create things in a different way. We don't have to go through the linear text gateway, which has been a bottleneck for.
Mark, you're not helping when it comes to doing goals. But what you're saying is really important.
You're asking about points, right? So put a point in about the mapping of text to graph, or as a placeholder. Someone may articulate that better than me, but that's something that's missing from there that I think is an important thing.
Okay, let me ask you guys based on that, because now the list is too long, obviously, and now we're getting almost into features. Should we maybe have two sections, one on how great can it be, and the questions under that, and then known issues? So maybe this could go under.
Well, so this is another one of those places where I I'm just come from a background of an inadequate rigor, but I would ask, does it matter? I think that these are good enough goals, because what if your goal is to attract the right kind of people to have the right kind of fire lit under them to be able to contribute? I think this is perfect, and I don't know necessarily know that it needs to be refined or split or anything like that. If it's to provide an exhaustive list of those sort of criteria and goals that you really want people to have, and such that you would, reject things from the journal or symposium meetings, then perhaps it needs a little bit more. But I think in terms of those, like sort of Mark intimated earlier, like if your goal is to achieve the right kind of interest and make sure that it's a reference point for the right kind of people to be interested in it, then this does that job really well. And I don't think you need more, honestly. I think it's great.
I just added this bit that I just pasted kind of in the middle. What I think it could be is in the hypertext community, there was in one of the earlier ones, 7 issues of hypertext. It became a bit quotable. So I'm thinking maybe we can together get a list of things that, let's say, maybe in 5 years we revisit. So it's not only for this, but it is, because this can also be in our book. It could be the very front page, maybe. Because it's also putting a stake in the ground of 2022, people who care about this. I'm not saying we're the greatest brains in the world. Maybe we are, but that would be random. What did people then think were the issues and opportunities, right? It becomes a de facto document for that. Oops.
Sorry, I just put in, you were alluding to how that's the 7 issues. So I just put up the resolved version I did for my thesis in the sidebar, which is his 3 takes on the 7 issues.
Thank you.
They're quite dated now. And interesting enough, at Hypertext this year, someone was saying, well, maybe it's a time to dust that off, because Hypertext and the web and everything has moved a long way from where we were in early 90s. I can't remember when he did his last run that which says there, but which was 2001. But even then, I think we've moved on a long way. I'm wondering, going back to your point about, and I understand why you refer to how that's the 7 issue, but I wonder if the area is sort of mature enough yet that making something sort of slightly totemic, like a list like that, would help or hinder. I don't know, and I don't say that without any. It's an open-ended conjecture. I don't have a view, but I think it's something to bear in mind.
I just thank you. I just did 3. If you don't mind, please reloading. You can see I've done how I've organized it. I haven't edited the bits because we haven't talked through it, but the headings.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm calling it increase understanding of potential, increase understanding of issues. So it's no longer about telling other people. It's about us coming together to better understand.
In which case, I put the second bullet, the raise awareness of issues under
Yeah.
issues.
That hasn't been edited at all. That's,
Okay, sorry. Okay, right. Yeah.
thanks. I just wanted to add, sorry guys, I know you're reading. Alan, your thing about the cannot take for granted is now the last bit in the potential. I think that makes sense there. Look at great stuff. Oh, it may not happen. That's kind of like a link to the issues one, right? Makes sense?
Yeah. Or indeed, it doesn't have to happen in the way it has happened. Is another aspect of that.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Apologies. Well, also that what we can't take for granted in that we don't have to be doing stuff in the way that we did. So it cuts both ways. So there are new ways, the potential of new ways to do things, and also the potential to slough off old ways which are no longer optimized for the environment we're using.
Right. Okay. Please reload. And do we agree that the bottom one, produce a record, that's simple, just one, that we can sign off on that one, right, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, that links back to your, that takes us all the way back to Doug, and you'll link back to, Endless in the Journal, and I think that's fine there. And you're just showing people that we're doing it for those that don't know, but I think those involved will be well aware that's what we've been doing.
Okay, so let's try to do the. There is some overlap here, of course.
Relating a bit to Brendel's job is maybe a possible topic, which what are the technologies that need to be in place in order for VR to become something, close to every day, right? Or once a week kind of experience. And an example of that would be, and this will also explain why it's useful, something like universal control that Apple has been deploying is a bit like a VR feeling when you actually hook it up and get it going, that you can move from iPad to another computer to all your monitors, and even though they have different apps, you have this it suddenly feels fluid.
Okay, that's good. Hang on. That's kind of in here, but let's focus on making that better. 1 second. Yeah. Please reload in case you're not up to date with the current layout. the last item above increased understanding of issues says, look at how text in VR might fit with traditional text media. That's where I think you're saying, but we can say it better and more. Can you give me more words?
Sure. What technologies, methodologies, even mental models need to be in place before we work in a VR world? And the benefit of that kind of talk is that it starts a little bit more in present day rather than from the future working backwards, you know, and it's a bit of a brainstorming exercise perhaps, but we can look at certain examples and it seems like Apple already has a lot of this in mind and they're working towards it. Randall, I just mentioned the universal control as being a great example of when you first experience it, you're like, oh, this is amazing. And it's clear that this is it's funny, it feels similar to VR in that kind of relief that you get, right? And it's, I think, one example of a technology that must have been very complicated to pull off, but a technology that needed to be in place before you could get to this ubiquitous VR or semi-ubiquitous, whatever, VR as an actual tool. So what are other things like that? You know, like a bit of a stretch, but I would say like, what is the Unicode or ASCII of VR, right? What's the multi-purpose language design for that space?
I have that as addressability also. Please reload. I've looked what you talked about now. I've added the last one before and before increased understanding of issues and addressability, because addressability is certainly an issue that will have to be addressed, right? But when you talk about kind of the idea of ASCII and VR, how should we better discuss that?
I don't know that it needs to go in gold or if anything, for format wise for that page, I think it would be useful to keep the goals as short as possible, but link to other pages on the site that talk about examples. You know, I think examples are tremendously useful to ground what you're talking about than just because a lot of times, you know, someone who hasn't been in these conversations will read these words and it'll just not mean anything to them. It won't land, you know. They'll get kind of a gist, but having specific examples helps couch it. But that may not be on that page.
Okay, but okay, I'll just update it again. So some of these we can nail down. So we all agree on the record one, so that's good. A third is gone. And then increased understanding of issues. Look at aspects of what work in VR can be, which we cannot take for granted. I've moved it. This is yours, Alan. Which will be developed by the commercial developers of VR systems. In other words, what won't automatically happen, right? Or should I word it differently?
I like that one won't automatically happen. Draw the distinction between what the commercial sector is going to naturally produce and what user communities need to incentivize if we want to see them develop. Oh, also, I just dropped 2 substantive links in the side chat. One is to the entry point for Mark Anderson's discussion of designators in the Tinderbox environment, and we might want to have equivalents in the VR space. And I also found a wonderful paper discussing AppleScript with recordability, attachability, and those ideas. So I have that link. You should really read that paper if you get a chance.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, I have to jump, but that did remind me one last thing that is not a goal per se of the symposium, but maybe more fitting in a kind of a vision statement, which is, this isn't the statement, but you'll all get where I'm coming from, that text and early advances in programming languages, in the early spirit of software, they share a very common bond in that they weren't siloed often into applications or products. They were meant to be, here are patterns that should work in any environment that we can imagine. And sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, and sometimes power, compute power changed the paradigm. So now we don't really need SQL, maybe the way we used to, whatever. Point is, we're having these conversations because we feel like if VR grows to maturity in the same paradigm that we have had for the last 30 years, which is like that that an app tries to trap your attention and all of your processes, but it doesn't portable to something else. I'm screwing up how to phrase that. There's something that's in the spirit of the way that we started out building computers and languages that is in the same spirit as text and writing, and trying to infuse that or reintroduce that or support it while VR is maturing. This isn't a communist statement against the Googles and the Apples, right? But there is something to the way that I work today personally is immensely more complex due to the way that I have to send data from one app to another, because all of these, our culture has moved into these proprietary sort of ways of doing business. And just as important as having this VR experience, I think, is escaping that mentality that we have succumbed to. If that makes any sense, it's something to think about.
Part of what I read is when Doug did his work, amongst others, he owned everything. Later on, you had applications in different companies and you had compatibility issues, but it was one environment. And we should dream towards one environment where things aren't owned, but anybody can take any information anywhere and just happen to use the tools. Is that something along the lines of what you're talking about?
Yeah, in some cases we still have it. I mean, like an outline works like an outline, most of your different tools, the idea of bullet points is understood. That's fantastic, right? That's not a given, but we don't even think about it because it works so often. More things should be like that. And there's another point too, just something in the Silicon Valley ethos where it feels like a product can solve a problem. And so the result of that, in order to solve the problem, you build up all of this stuff that only lives within that one single environment of the product or the stakeholders. And that's a short-term way of thinking. It's a necessary way of thinking at times to make progress.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. There's something there that may be valuable in the purpose. And Jordan Lear, I saw that would be all for that, right? But I'm phrasing it very well. Anywho, I gotta go.
Okay,
It's been a pleasure as always.
good to see you.
Yeah, thanks, Alan.
I'll have to bow out at the bottom of the hour.
Okay. Peter, just briefly, since you're looking at the page, if you want to make the CSS for all the pages a little bit wider, I'm totally cool with that. The column is really narrow. If that's
Okay,
easier,
we'll
to
do.
line breaks and stuff. Okay.
Something that was really interesting that Alan raised, which is important. Like he was talking about that cross-device thing that he said feels that Apple does, that feels like virtual reality, when in fact I think, and he labeled it correctly as well, it's textbook ubiquitous computing. It's
Say that again.
Ubicomp is,
The line was bad. Please repeat that.
Sure. So saying, the being able to move cursors across devices between your iPad to your Mac and various things. He characterized that as feeling like VR before then saying the correct term, which is ubiquitous computing or Ubicom. That is textbook Ubicom, and that makes me think about whether you want to use a word like XR or mixed reality rather than VR, if you want people to think about. I mean, it depends on whether it's important as a distinction. But yeah, what we're interested in, I think, is spatial computing or some other variant, and virtual reality technically is to the exclusion of that a little bit, but it may not matter for the purposes of that. Like, is that something that you have a perspective on addressing? Because ubiquitous computing is kind of more broadly part of spatial computing, I would argue, but it's not part of virtual reality per se. You know what I mean?
Yeah, please reload. I have added it. It's the second one above increase understanding of issues. It's not perfect. Can we polish it? Hang on.
This is the mental model.
No, sorry, please reload again. Okay. It is, look at how text might, oops, I have
Oh,
typo.
two mites.
Yeah.
I lose the
yeah.
first one.
Yeah, look at how text in VR might fit with traditional text media as part of a ubiquitous computing environment.
That sounds good.
Or as a component in a.
How about foundation of?
No, you can't. I don't think you can have foundation because that elevates it above the other. And if you look at the very top, I've bolded and italicized the last part of the last sentence, which starts with, at core, we ask, what can work with text when accessible in traditional flat screens and in VRB? How can it augment who we are, and what will text be when unleashed? Hyperbole 101, done. I'm just trying to capture the argument of, oh no, we're not going to remove those screens, that included, right?
So one issue that sort of springs to mind, just thinking on what Alan just said, this coming out of his potential fear that we end up with another sort of walled garden potentially around things, is that a challenge partly for VR is it's in a sense a very visual forwards environment, and yet it's entirely constructed. So to see the rich things we want, somebody actually has to make them. That's quite a challenge, really, because that's like trying to assemble the branch you want to sit on when it's not there. So an early stage challenge is to be able to work in abstraction. So it is an imagination game, not of a different type. The early stage is going to, a lot of it, you're going to have to build it in here to start with, because otherwise, you're going to require so much infrastructure just to get to the point to say, does this work? Which is why I'm sort of find myself much more relaxed than I think I'd otherwise be about looking at prototypes and things, to accept that there's no point in making it look sexy if that's not the point of the prototype. If it's just saying, look, this interaction can work. But that's actually quite an alien thing, again, in the wider audience. So therefore I think it is a genuine issue.
Yeah, no, that's a critical issue in my line of work, is what is a prototype and what is a prototype for? What does it need to be in order to answer the questions that are in front of us? Because many people disagree, and but there are certain ways of moving through the sort of the question space, and they are served by at times counterintuitive approaches.
Because it breaks us out of an old style management where you turn up and the boss man tells you, you put all this work and said, yeah, can I have it blue and the other way up?
Right,
which
so,
which in a sense could have been specified an earlier point in the process. But it gets back to the thing of the number of people who are either willing or indeed able to engage with some fairly abstracted thinking at this early stage, because until we've built it, there's nothing to see.
guys, about what you're talking about now, Mark, please reload and have a look at increased understanding of issues and tell me what should be changed to fit that.
So I suppose there's an education element to it. It's getting people to understand that how they judge this is not whether they see something that looks sexy and attractive.
Yeah, but I don't
Because that will take us down the entertainment route.
Yeah, but I don't understand that point in this context. I
Right, so
understand the point in
right, so
general, but how
an
would
issue.
Okay, I'm afraid I have to drop off now. I'll see you on Friday.
okay, see you then. Bye, Peter.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I guess what you're talking about is the developing the like analytical tools or the exploratory process for this. And I mean, I agree that it needs to be. I don't know that I would necessarily. Is that like if you look at Kai and other sort of places where people are doing the work of innovating, like is there particular sort of capabilities or approaches that need to be developed in here as distinct from that? Because I agree that from a lay perspective, the sort of mechanisms for analysis are wrong because we've been kind of sold a level of polish that comes from science fiction that's not reflective of how those things work now. But yeah, like where does the, you know, it's similar to what I was saying to Frodo that sort of opened this all up about the potentials of VR and folding the right things. Like, what about that question are we on the hook for? I guess is, I think, important to resolve how to address it. Like, is there, because like I said, like from a popular perspective, absolutely, but from an academic perspective or a research perspective, like what is it that what specific paucity, what do we feel uniquely mandated or competent to address is a bigger question.
Mm-hmm. I've got a thought because I think what I was thinking of was more fun enough is bridging to the lay perspective, and not the general audience, but more the C-suite audience.
Oh, yep.
Who just want it to look sexy so they can, you know, because that's what they're used to getting. And I think so part of proselyte, I won't even try. Part of what we've got to get across is to bridge the thing that some of the things we need to do aren't going to arrive in the first instance as sexy looking pictures.
Yeah, okay.
Which is, I think, where a lot of people are, and that's an important thing that the group can help put across.
Is that a goal, though? You know, there are many things that are important to.
No, it's an issue. It's not a goal. It's an issue because if that's not resolved, we'll continue to.
Hang on. No, but hang on. The goals include issues and opportunities, right? Can you formulate it as an issue to be listed here? Because I think you're raising it as an issue of the state of what is, rather than an issue of how it can be dealt with. But that's just how I'm currently hearing it. Or maybe I just have a hang up about pretty pictures because I like pretty pictures.
Well, so do I, and therein lies the problem, because we're predisposed to like pretty pictures.
I don't think it's a problem. Remember, Apple does pixel perfect mockups. It's for a reason. You know, there are sometimes you should really do pencil sketches, but pencil sketches are very specific, and some they allow the viewer to give more feedback because they feel they can. But at the same time, it gives them a very different idea of what something is than if it looks like it's an actual computer system. So I think these are worthwhile things to discuss in terms of development, but I'm not sure how it fits in our list. And we only have 24 minutes left.
I mean, where I'd say it fits is the ability of people to effectively commission effectively in this area, because not everything can be done as a grassroots thing. And the difference from the examples you've just given is that, yes, you may make, you know, pixel perfect mock-ups of a new phone that is going to be a physical entity. The stuff we're talking about will never be a physical entity, and it's going to be manifested in a form that
Mark,
we can't even yet imagine.
Mark, we have a lot of ones to write. Can you try to write that in a sentence or two while we also look at the other ones? Because we have some issues with, for instance, at the top one, I call everything examine, and below I say look at. You know, how do you guys think? What is the shape of this thing? So, for instance, if you please reload now, I've just changed the top heading. I just want to know if you think it makes more sense, because now I have examine the potential. So then I can remove. Does that make sense?
Do you mean utilize or use? I think you mean use.
Where are you?
Third bullet down. As written, I think that should be used, because utilize actually means something slightly different.
Sure, or take advantage of. Employ.
Yeah, or just write use. I mean, it's just.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd go for a short word. You know,
In script, press gang.
Right. I was.
I don't even know how to do these headings, guys. Because I have goals. The goals of this symposium are to spark dialogue based on : and no, that doesn't fit with. No, it does.
Well, you turn that into examining the potential instead, if you wanted to do that, increasing that would call it positive low, just based on examining the potential, increasing understanding. So
Yeah, I mean,
that's my hack fix on that. But yeah, I take your broader point.
In fact, if you say increasing understanding, you can almost get rid of issues, because we're skirting around what we're calling problems anyway, and it's kind of self-evident. It's because in a sense, these are broadly pros and cons, and I don't mean to trivialize it. But you know, it's a good thing to sort of stay away from the negative terms where we can, whilst accepting there's some things that need to be addressed, because otherwise they lead to bad outcomes.
okay, well, hang on. You know what? So we're literally on the same page. I'm sharing screen. Haha. Okay, so here we have in the top a little bit of preamble, and then we have to clarify what we're talking about. We're not talking about CAD. We're not talking about social or gaming. So that's out of it right there. We don't have to repeat that. Hyperbole. The main goal is to spark dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Then we have, should we just call it potential and issues, and then produce a record, or look at the issues and potential? Look at or examine or something else?
A spanner is that I would want to probably call them potential issues. So it's opportunities and issues. They're both potential opportunities and issues, but I'm not sure. I feel I don't feel too bad about repeating the word potential there, just because it's also speculative in the future. So
No, that's
yeah,
fine, but
how's that?
Jane, I agree with you. We don't know what's happening. So potential opportunities and potential issues is better. But now the question is, do we say examine potential opportunities? What are we doing? Or are we saying look at? Or are we not, do we not need that kind of language?
Do you, I mean, so we're adding some words here that are then ambiguous. I mean, I'm not sure what we're trying to add here. I mean, it's just adding more to read. More to read means someone will stop reading more quickly. I would probably leave it as potential opportunities and potential issues.
Okay.
Otherwise, I mean,
right. Okay. So let's
yeah,
say we do that. So then we go to to spark dialogue. Oh, hang on, we go. Boom. I fixed it. What do you think? Just in that sentence, I say that. Spark dialogue around potential opportunities and issue, potential opportunities. Now we know it's about dialogue. So how do we do grammatically? Where text will fit, where will text put in? Do you want to look at issues or opportunities first? Sorry, I don't want to scroll around and be super annoying.
well, why not start at the top and work down? I think it's 6 and 2 3s which end we start.
Okay.
So,
It's actually hard, isn't it?
no, well, in the first bullet, it's the run-on sentences. I think, for instance, in the first bullet, the second part is basically trying to help explain the first part. So it's not an and, it's basically an e.g. or for instance. I'm not saying to literally write that, but the and is confusing me because
can we delete it? But it's not actually, it's not an opportunity. It's kind of
yeah.
It's not an opportunity. It's kind of an aside. So maybe we look at how text can enhance VR work, or how text can be unleashed or be.
I think enhance makes it sound tangential, and I think one of our views is actually it's fairly fair and square in the center. So.
But in between opportunities and issues, do we need another heading that says neutral stuff? I'm not trying to be funny. I'm trying to just see the shape of this. Hang on.
So I'm trying to think how to encapsulate this thing, that one of the things we're already getting at is how we bridge from the world we've grown up in to a couple of hundred years of print technology, or 150 years of print technology, and where we're headed. So text has a role in.
Forgive me, just 1 minute. Sorry.
Yep.
I guess that first one, like, how isn't that everything? Is the question that I would have. Like, is it just a restatement of the overall, or is it a particular clarification?
How about, I think this point made me realize that we shouldn't divide issues and opportunities. We can have that as a sentence. We can just, we don't have to do that. We can start maybe more positive and then gradually go more into issues maybe, and just leave it at that. What do you think?
And one rationale for being able to delineate things a little further is 7 plus or minus 2, having the ability to kind of structure those things so that there's a subhead in all of these. But it may also be occur to us to winnow some of these things down after we've recognized the commonality between them. So I don't necessarily know that we need to reach for a solution there, but in general, you know, having a hierarchy of information which doesn't have too many things at a given level is typically good. So that would be a reason, but not necessarily. Doesn't necessarily mean that the final list needs that particular delineation.
Yes. So here's the thing. It's so annoying with this floating toolbar, but anyway, we can start the sentences with look at or question. We can also have or examine. We can, so some of them can have a question mark after. So should they all have a question mark? That's what I'm trying to say.
I don't know, because one other head start I might put might be to explain.
Because that assumes we know.
All right, well, find a term that says the same. But one of the things is explaining something doesn't mean you necessarily know the answer, but you're explaining something that is completely unknown to somebody in terms of where it is. So it's not absolute. It doesn't mean you have to know the answer, but you may know more than the next person. And I think one of the things we trip across here is a lot of people don't really have much understanding of VR beyond entertainment. And so part of the thing is to help bridge, is to help explain what's there, because in other words, if you ask them all these questions without helping them to understand these new affordances, we may not get very far, because people will just fall back into their old norms.
That I think is a little outside of scope, because hopefully these 2 days will be about people who are really dedicated. I'm very happy if we make supportive material like that. Like, I've written my personal why VR, why text. If we or you want to write here is an introduction to thinking about this or that would be amazing. But I think the day should be more provocative rather than explanatory. Does that?
No, I that's not what I meant by explain. And so one of the opportunities and issues is to actually explain what the hell this is to people, because I think that's something that's sitting there in the void. Anyway, I'm not going to dive into it. That's what I meant. It's not about us explaining at the conference. It's about taking this away as something that those of us interested in the sphere need to do.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's captured in Produce a Record a little bit, but also it can be elsewhere on the website. We're just trying to hammer through the goals.
That's fine. You disagree? Leave it. I'm really
no.
Genuinely. Otherwise, we'll go round in circles. Let's crack on.
I see you have a point, but I'm wondering if it fits in the goal or elsewhere on the site. If you want to work on, maybe even we have a meeting where we try to explain.
No. Honestly, no. It's not. It's not worth spending. We'll spend too much time. Let's get back to the job at hand, to this list. Number 2 seems incredibly broad. It's a bit lively. I don't mean that. I don't mean that as critique, but it pretty much sort of covered it soup to nuts. And in other words, you either get it or you don't. So the question is, how do we encapsulate what I know you're getting at there?
It may be deletable. It may be just too vaguely. Or maybe it is good enough, because if the key reason is partly to inspire a participant to write a paper.
Well, it could be, in a sense, that could be your rounding out point, because in a sense it encapsulates all these other things, because they all lead to the ability of us to use VR in work. So that's one way to, rather than remove it. I wasn't suggesting that, but perhaps it wants to go at the end, or either as the last bullet, or perhaps underneath the lot as effectively as a containing statement.
This isn't related to any specific point, but well, maybe on some of the ones about VR work. I think it's often instructive to try to identify what something isn't and why it isn't in order to clearly delineate. And so I'm just looking at the VRST proceedings, and it's obviously a different job, but looking at that might help drive a wedge between this and that, and other places, because yeah, like I don't know, I'm really curious, like where would does CSCW still exist? I'm sure it does. Like where are the things that are close to this, and are they this or are they not, and why? I find it useful for myself, maybe for selfish reasons, to figure out who I'm not. Yeah.
Is there a sort of VRST explanation or something I just found the VRST sort of ACM org site. Is there a particular description that you were thinking of just there?
No, I mean, one sees it through the proceedings. You know,
Okay.
You look at avatar tracking control with generations of physically natural responses on contact to reproduce performance loads, fusing semantics, segmentation, and object detection for visual SLAM. A system to build flexible virtual reality experiences. I mean, that's vague enough that it could be something, but spatial augmented reality, visibility and line of sight cues for building design, like those point at something, and they're not this, and this is, yeah. So I'm also interested in maybe CFCW is close in a way as well. So like look at what was actually in CSCW 21 to see.
So part of this is putting the human in the loop, which sort of gets back to, you know, Ben Schneiderman's human AI sort of argument, because I've still seen the same in hypertext, where it keeps wandering off into the technical weeds. So half the conference is now dealing in recommender systems, and there's all sorts of really interesting stuff in hypertext just not being looked at. And when I look at sort of things like CSCW again, I sort of see people lost in the technical weeds. So one of the things that's interesting running through the future of text is a far more broad and a far more humanist, that's probably the wrong word, perspective, or, you know, that people are involved in it far more.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important thing to capture. Ironically, though, we're talking about work. So in other words, it's not what the machines will do unto us, but what we can do with the machines.
Right, okay, we have 6 minutes. Are there any major issues? Of course, feel free to email me offline with edits and I'll implement them, but the time we have now.
Yeah, no, I think this is really, really good progress. It's awesome. Yeah, and I'm looking at how much time I want to spend over there at the moment to figure out what to do, because I'd love to be there in person.
Yeah. Is there a chance you can come over?
Yeah. Yeah, there's some Apple folks in London at the Glass House.
Yeah.
And I'm hopefully cool enough now to be able to hang out with them. So that would be fun. And there, I don't know I don't know if it's actually happened yet, but we're supposed to be taking Battersea as a headquarters as well. And I'd love to go see that too.
Oh, yeah. If you go there, once you've been there, you need to bring your non-cool friends, i.e. us, to have a look at it too.
The note about how we'll need to change actually, I think it actually encapsulates my point about explaining. I mean, you can unpack that subject underneath that heading. So that I think that's that little balloon gone away.
Oh, I had a favor to request is if you could provide an actual intro for me to Bruce Horn, then that would be lovely. I know I can just email him, but
Just email me saying, do you mind? And I'll do it instantly. I'll just forward that because he already knows who you are.
oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, so that's 2 seconds.
Well, if he already knows, I can just message him on our internal direct messaging system if he uses that. But
Yeah,
okay, no, I'll do that then. Yeah.
No,
I'll get you to do it.
I think that's just fine. Just do it directly and just say, I suggested you get straight in touch with him and that'll remind him.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
That's super easy.
Yeah, no, this has been really, really great work. Because yeah, when we first came across those points, I was like, what isn't this? And I think that we're at a much clearer point of what it isn't, to the point where it'll excite folks a lot more. I don't know if you had any further conversations with Elio, but yeah, it'd be cool to get people like his take on it as well, because he's fairly entrenched in this intersection as well, for which is wonderful to discover. I don't know if you watched it, Mark, but he's well in touch with.
I haven't yet, but I'm sad I wasn't there, but I shall. Yes, do.
Yeah, do if you can spare the time, it's definitely worth it. He's
Sure.
talking with Noda, and he's talking with Conor White-Bell and all of the folks in Rome and those places, and I think it's really neat intersection and proof positive that other people have come to it spontaneously without our assistance.
Well, it's the classic, the day I'm not there is the day it all happens.
yeah. It does.
Oh, on that note, Mark, can you stay away more often?
my gift to the community.
But on a less silly note, so on this, actually, we're done for now, so I'm going to stop recording.